Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden in my home bunker.
And I'm Christina Hoff-Summers in my day, 45? How long have we been sequestered? No one knows anymore.
I don't know. I think I was trying to remember whether it's been like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I kind of lost track.
I'm still not minding it.
Yeah, you're still not minding it? What if it goes on now? They're saying like months.
I'm ready for it. I have plans, all sorts of different rooms.
Are you actually getting around to doing things? Because this is the thing that I'm finding. I'm finding myself weirdly busy and I don't know why. Do you have that feeling? Like I keep thinking, okay, now's the time. I have cleaned some closets and things, but I don't know, just a lot of the time I seem like I'm busy and I don't know what I'm doing.
I know, and I'm supposed to call my sister and I said, I just can't, I have so many. She says, what are you doing?
Exactly.
I get caught up in 1,000 things. But I think I'm hoping and praying I'm going to have this period of creativity. It's going to be like Albert Einstein in 1905. He wrote 4 papers and changed the foundations of 20th century physics and relativity, quantum theory. But I'll do that in my area, writing about this and that. But it hasn't yet happened.
It's only been, what? We couldn't even tell 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah,
writing these incredible works. Also wanted to thank our listeners for their patience of last week's recording. So we discovered in the interim that if Christina sounded like she was talking from another room, which she did, or the back of the room, her microphone, her very fancy microphone, was not working properly. So she right now is not using that very fancy microphone. But we're hoping now, just if you sound a little echoey, Christina, and that's just because you're just using your built-in mic on your computer. But we'll see.
Next week there'll be little improvements each week.
Yes, and actually, both a listener and my 18-year-old daughter told me how to put my computer on Do Not Disturb mode, so we don't have.
It was so upsetting. Every minute it was binging, and then your kids started texting each other madly, which is irritating no matter what. When people are texting back and forth, and you're in the conversation, but you don't wish to be.
Yeah. So
and you've caught that under control.
We'll find out.
And I've kind of cleaned up my office, but I'm still working on that.
Yeah, we also promised people we would get this on YouTube, because we have a new YouTube channel, and it's still being set up. What can I say? And last week's recording was kind of messy, and not just because of the audio, but we are going to try post this one, and I will give you more details if you follow us on social, on Twitter at Femsplainers, Facebook at Femsplainers, and Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. I will keep you up to date onto where to find the link to our new YouTube channel, and we'll get it up also on our site at femsplainers.com. But Christina, you're not the only one, and I'm not the only one who are not doing as well as we thought in this isolation. Apparently, according to my favorite source, the Daily Mail, but it's citing a study. I think this is a British study.
The Daily Mail citing a study.
It always cites studies. The Institute of Employment Studies surveyed 500 workers amidst lockdown. And guess what? Guess what they're doing, Christina? Do you think they're all working out and becoming healthier?
No, I know, because they're probably doing what I'm doing. Too much drinking and eating and TV watching.
Yes, they're drinking more alcohol, eating less healthy food, and having problems sleeping.
I'm sleeping well, but I go to bed at 3 a.m.
Yeah, you have your weird night owl schedule. More than half reported feeling new pains in their neck, shoulders, and back. Around half less are eating less healthily. I think one of the challenges I've found is you have to pretend that you're going to work or have a schedule even when you don't. I've just been trying, I started, and now I'm not even doing that anymore, like writing out what I would do, each day.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, there's a scene in a Seinfeld episode though, where George decides, he runs into Seinfeld and he says, and he's wearing sweats, just a brown sweats. And George says, what are you wearing? He says, it's comfortable. I realized from now on, this is what I'm going to wear. I'm totally comfortable. And Seinfeld says, why don't you just put a sign across the front? I give up. That's how I feel. I was in sweats. My hair, and I was going feral. So I didn't want to give up. So now I dressed up. I haven't worn a pretty blouse, and
you look so pretty. No, it's great that we can at least see each other on this Zoom thing. I've let the side down. I'm wearing a t-shirt, but I feel like
cute.
Well, it's
you look like Nancy Drew, or one of these career girls, all or Sky King.
Oh, because of my headphones, because I look so pro.
Just like, or you know what? You look like an army girl.
Oh, yes, I do, don't I? Special ops in a kind of bunker.
You could have been in special ops.
I blab. I have a very hard time keeping a secret.
No, I was going to say you'd have a hard time not getting your pedicures and all that, but you'd still be formidable.
Well, my pedicure just officially gave out. I looked at my toes and
this is what's happening. I haven't been without a pedicure for, I don't know, since I was 16.
I didn't know what my toenail colors were. And you know what? They're not nice.
They're not, because you do something weird to them. If you have to give them breaks. You have to take off so I'm giving my pedicures, and my toes a break from that.
Well, I don't.
And my hair, I don't know what color it is. I fear I'm about to find out.
Did you, now last week, so it was Easter. Well, most people are doing virtual church services, except have you seen the crazy evangelical church that they said, if we have to die for Christ, we will. And they're still busing people to services. And I also think like that logic is also, I will kill for Christ, because you go back into the community and you endanger people. But it's been a weird holiday time. You and we did Passover via Zoom with our families. How did yours go?
It was wonderful. It was all my kids in Houston. I felt like I was at the table. And all those years we invested in Hebrew school pay off every year, because the boys, Tamler and David, they know Hebrew. David better than Tamler, and because he actually went to a Jewish day school. And it was wonderful. And, every Seder, I noticed at one point they didn't have a glass of wine for the prophet Elijah. It's part of the service. You have a glass. It has
to be on a Zoom window, like just put that glass of wine in its own Zoom window.
Yeah, well, they didn't do it. And then Tamler said, it's turned out that Elijah had some Me Too issues, some accusations, so we're canceling him this year. So we didn't have Elijah. But it was wonderful. I didn't have all the food. I couldn't get it together. So I just symbolically had the entire meal reduced to a glass of pink champagne. So I drank champagne throughout.
Did you have matzah?
I couldn't find any.
Oh, I bought some like 2 weeks ago. I saw it and I just thought I should buy it, and I got it.
Not to buy it, but I'm going to try to get some and have my bitter herbs. I like bitter herbs more, and roast it together. And I'm going to have it, but I haven't had it yet.
Well, that was the thing. We made a nice meal, but again, I didn't feel like there was time, and you'd think there's nothing but time to get ready for this meal. And it was all very last minute, but we all did do our hair, makeup, and dress up. Well, except for David, he just wore a tie. But
I remember once having Pesach at your house. I know our friends' children were young then. I won't say who, but they had a horrible fight, the boys.
Yeah, and one tried to light the table on fire.
Yeah, they were. Now they're grown up, wonderful, civilized. That's how long ago this was. But that was fun.
Well, the last bit of coronavirus news, and then we can get away from this, because we have Katie Roiphe is joining us from her isolation tank in New York, which is very, very exciting.
I'm so looking forward to this. But before we talk about Katie Roiphe,
yeah,
I have just like the best article to come out of the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
A top German doctor. Ooh, a German doctor, that has bad associations, but never mind. A top German doctor recommends whiskey to protect against the virus. The World Health Organization has vehemently disagreed, but they haven't been.
What's his basis? Like, what's his scientific?
Dr. Jürgen Riesland, a lead doctor. I don't know what this publication is. A lead doctor at the Institute of Virology at Saarland University Hospital in Germany.
Sounds very
on record saying that drinking whiskey can protect against COVID-19.
So the people who are drinking too much in isolation should be just drinking too much whiskey. It sounds like is the sort of compromise.
Yeah, and then someone asked him, he was prodded in saying, "All right, you're not suggesting that we drink high-proof alcohol?" And he wouldn't back down. He said, "Yes, I am." So let's hear it from Dr. Riesland.
Well, there's a certain logic to the fact that the alcohol will kill germs. Oh. I hit my special effects button by mistake. Did you hear that?
Yes. No special effects.
It was sort of good timing.
It was pretty good.
Whiskey will protect you. Do 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 do. No, I think it does. I think the alcohol. You have it when you have a cold, and it's very helpful.
I once had a girlfriend who cured me of a cold with something she brewed. She was French, and it was cognac and honey. No, cognac, lemon.
Hot water and it's called a hot toddy and other.
It was perfect, and I was better. It was better than chicken soup, which also can cure colds.
Apparently. Well, just the last, this is a funny story I found about coronavirus, and this is coming from another reputable source, the New York Post. So the Malaysia government has told women not to nag their husbands during the lockdown, and I'll just read this to you. It has sparked outrage.
Not to be
clean up their crumbs. David is still sore about that. It sparked outrage by telling women to avoid nagging their hubbies during the lockdown. A series of online posters with the hashtag Women Prevent COVID-19 told residents how to behave while stuck at home, urging women to dress up nicely and wear makeup. They were also told to avoid nagging their husbands and to instead lighten the mood by mimicking the high-pitched voice of Doraemon, a blue anime robot cat popular across Asia. Another poster depicts a man sitting on a sofa telling women to refrain from being, quote-unquote, sarcastic if they need help with household chores. Oh, man.
That would go over well here.
Yeah.
The Trump White House, imagine they put out advice not to be nagged.
Yeah, well, it's, you're kind of waiting. That's the next advice to come from the podium. But anyway, let's talk about Katie Roiphe before she comes on. She's written this new book called The Power Notebooks. She was supposed to be in studio with us back in the day when we had one. And
people actually got together.
Yeah, and we were going to have her with us, which was very, very exciting. But instead, we're going to have her joined by Zoom. But her book, I mean, there's so much to say about Katie Roiphe.
First of all, we love the book. I found it absolutely fascinating. Every page, she writes beautifully. She has such an original life and an original attitude towards the world. I worship her. I can't behave like a sycophant when she comes on, but I love her.
Well, I didn't know what to expect. I mean, it's sort of just called The Power Notebooks. There's no subtitle. And then I was trying to describe it to both my daughters and my husband. I'm like really, really loving it. But when you try and explain it, it sounds like, oh, this is not something I want to read because it's very hard to explain.
Like her. She's sui generis. It's just Katie. And she sort of, it does have a structure in that she's looking at women's complicated lives, especially successful, powerful women of the new millennium and women from the past, and her life, which is a combination of fantastic success and then just brutal chaos and disappointment. And then she looks, and especially with men, and bad choices sometimes. And so she looks at and she weaves her stories, I guess, from her journals and things, her recollections. She weaves them in with similar recollections of powerful women, Simone De Beauvoir and Mary McCarthy, and Edith Wharton. And women like that their public face was that of, absolute, being absolutely formidable and tough. I mean, Mary McCarthy, everyone was afraid of her.
Yeah, and she was married to Edmund Wilson, the critic, who turns out to be a total wife beater monster. And
she adored him and sort of lived for him. Simone de Beauvoir was married to that little guy, Jean-Paul Sartre, towering intellect, but he was about 5'5", nearsighted. He, thick glasses, kind of hideous, really, and abusive, psychologically abusive. He always had a string of girlfriends, and she was madly in love with him. She frustrated the feminists because she said, "I don't care what you think. This was my choice." And she said that was her life's greatest achievement, was to have the companionship of Jean-Paul Sartre, who was, impossible.
Well, this is what she kind of explores. I'm just going to read the book jacket. I feel like I'm copying out by doing this, but it really does sort of tell, because it is written in this kind of, I don't want to say fragmentary, but notebook sort of way. Right. It gathered around themes, but as like you and I, we both found it gripping. But it says, I'm reading from the jacket. It says, in a series of notebook entries, Roiphe weaves her personal experiences of divorce, single motherhood, and relationships with insights into the lives and loves of famous writers such as Sylvia Plath and Simone de Beauvoir. In each entry, Roiphe takes up a problem of power, asking questions including, why does a writer as flagrantly self-assured as Mary McCarthy have to ask her husband for a nickel to make a telephone call, which she apparently did. He squandered her earnings. And why can't Sylvia Plath get past the idea that her entire being hangs on one man, as her American psychiatrist put it? And then it goes on to say, using her own life as a case study, Roiphe dives into everyday quandaries, including why we stay in destructive relationships, the quest for likability, the difficulty of asking for raises, and the dangers of being perceived as a strong woman. I think what I loved too about it, this was one of these very personal books, and even while she was talking about the sort of familiar power imbalances between men and women, there was nothing ideological about it. There was nothing political. It was
she resists that.
Yeah,
and that's why I just find her. And just to give a little background. She's a brilliant young woman, and she went to Harvard and studied English. Then I think she got a PhD at Princeton. And at the age 24, she published a book called The Morning After, which is sort of an expose on some of the eccentricities of the date rape movement and the misinformation and this culture of fragility and fear that it had created. And she sort of warned. She's a feminist, but she warned her sister feminists not to set the house of feminism in the world of trauma and fragility. It was really ahead of its time. And
that was what we were part of that. Well, we've talked about this in our early days, that we were trying to sort of save feminism from this victimology attitude.
Yeah.
Hate
and
men
to be more respectful of women and complexity, and this is what she understands, that in every situation and a love relationship, there's complexity and there's two sides of the story. And even if she's telling her own story, she realizes she's not an entirely reliable narrator.
Yes. And she goes back and questions herself.
She questions herself. She resists easy cliches. There are no, she just isn't capable of it. And the other thing about her is she's such a good writer.
Yeah, no, it's
every
very
sentence. She teaches writing, and by the way, she is now a tenured professor. Thank God she got tenure, because she dared to question the Me Too movement a couple of years ago. While embracing its goals, like us, she just questioned some of the excesses and urged nuance and acknowledging there are degrees of guilt. And she questioned this, the shitty men in media list, and suggesting it was McCarthyist just to have anonymous informants putting the names of men on the internet where they could not defend themselves. And for that,
she got Twitter mobbed, which we'll ask her about. But that
it was vicious.
Before the article came out, she was.
I would say the feminist establishment, they hate her so much because she's sort of one of them. And I think the same thing happens to people like Caitlin Flanagan and there's a group of Harvard professors. They leave them alone somewhat, but they really hate them. So there's just no room in Orthodox feminism for dissident voices. And in every page of this book, it's a personal story. It's a story of powerful women, but the complexities of their personal lives. And it's not explicitly political, but it is a statement about the human condition. And the suggestion that a rigid feminism doesn't really capture it, and may be blaming patriarchy for the human condition.
Well, I was going to get, like, Katie Roiphe has a bit of a sore spot, because when we were all writing about this, the first round in the early 90s, I guess, or mid 90s, our books, my first book, What Our Mothers Didn't Tell Us, came out around the same time as The Morning After. And she got all this attention. And I got it. My book got attention too, but she, it was one of those things where you just are eaten and consumed with envy that her book. And I remember saying to David at the time, like, why is her book getting so much of this, but sort of glamorous attention, And he said, well, let's think. You're a married woman writing about motherhood and sex and love. And she's like a hot young single woman writing about sex. And I thought that was, you could look at that. That's kind of a sexist explanation, but I think it's very true.
Yeah. And my book came out around the same time, but I loved what she did. And
well, she was very pro-sex. If I remember, The Morning After was also, it wasn't just like challenging feminist orthodoxy. It was like, hey, women should own
adventure and have agency.
And that was, that's can be seen as a very popular message, especially when you're 25 and gorgeous.
Gorgeous. And she's still gorgeous. And she's very thin and tall and wears, what's the highest heel you can have?
Oh, I don't know, but a platform.
No, because you wear them.
I don't know, 4.5 inches, 5 inches.
She wears those. She's just sensational in every way, and completely.
Let's
unfairly targeted by these bitter people on Twitter. Right. Twitter feminists.
Let's bring her into the conversation, and then after the conversation, we haven't had time to do some the great letters we've been receiving from our listeners, and I want to answer some of them, especially because a lot of people had comments about our Race to Dinner episode, where we had to learn about our racism and clearly failed at it.
Oh yeah, and one of them, or maybe both of them, those two women that charged $2,500 to race shame white women, insecure white women. Someone said it's kind of like an S&M thing, but weird psychological torture. They have a book contract.
Syra has a book contract. Well, that's a bestseller. Well, you got to give them this, that business model of sitting down to dinner for $2,500 is not going to go over well in isolation. So have to do, I don't know if you could charge as much for a Zoom dinner, but anyway, well, let's bring on Katie, and then we'll read some of your listener comments after. Well, everybody now seems to be running their business from home, and if you're trying to deal with HR issues, that can be a nightmare. But Bambee, that's Bambee, is here to help you.
And when running a business, you know that your HR situation can kill you.
And wrongful termination suits, minimum wage requirements, labor regulations.
And HR manager salaries, they aren't cheap. An average of, $70,000 a year.
Bambee was created specifically for small business.
You can get a dedicated HR manager, craft an HR policy, and maintain your compliance, all for just $99 a month.
With Bambee, you can change HR from your biggest liability to your biggest strength.
Your dedicated HR manager is available by phone, email, and real chat.
From onboarding to terminations, they customize your policies to fit your business and help you manage your employees day to day, all for just $99 a month.
Month to month, no hidden fees, cancel anytime.
You didn't start your business because you wanted to spend time on HR compliance.
So let Bambee help. Get your free HR audit today.
Go to Bambee.com/FEM, F-E-M, right now to schedule your free HR audit.
That's Bambee.com/FEM.
Spelled B-A-M to the BEE.com/FEM. Well, Christina, remember you were talking about trying to diet and be healthy while we're all in quarantine?
Yes.
Well, I'm very excited. We have a new sponsor called Sakara, which is basically going to send you healthy and nutritious meals to your home.
What perfect timing.
I know. And especially right now that grocery stores, I mean, if you go into them at all, they're picked over. Or if you're trying to order, from grocery food delivery services, that's become difficult. But
it's all difficult. And they're going to, bring fresh, delicious meals straight to our doors. Sakara is a godsend right now.
Right. And it's a nutrition company that believes wellness begins with what you eat.
And their signature nutrition program brings this transformational power of plant nutrition to your home in the form of fresh, plant-rich, ready-to-eat meals. They're made with organic ingredients, powerful superfoods. Each meal is expertly designed to build your immune system, which we need, improve energy, support gut health and digestion, and keep your skin glowing.
From hearty salads and nutrient-dense granolas to savory flatbreads and seasonal fruit parfaits, their ever-changing menu of creative, chef-crafted meals makes clean eating delicious.
And all of their meals are 100% plant-based, gluten-free, dairy-free, and non-GMO.
And in addition to their delicious meals, Sakara also offers daily essentials like supplements and herbal teas to complete your wellness routine and support overall health and vitality. To boost immunity, as you say, which we need right now, try their best-selling daily probiotic blend of detox water drops with pure chlorophyll.
And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their order. All you have to do is go to sakara.com/femsplain or enter the code femsplain at checkout.
That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/femsplain to get 20% off your order.
Sakara.com/femsplain.
Katie, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're sorry not to have you in person, which was the original plan.
I know.
But we've just been raving about your book, though. So
we've raved about your book. Everybody will have to buy it. I'm going to make a fuss on Twitter after this interview because I just loved it.
Oh, thank you.
It was so beautifully done. And the way you weave the lives of these authors we all admire, these powerful, formidable women, and what complicated and sometimes chaotic personal lives they had. And you too. You told your own story of your various adventures, and it was so well done. How did you decide? When did you decide to do a book about complicated lives? Well, you've done several.
Yeah, it's a subject I've been dealing with for a while, but this idea, that paradox of women who are sort of strong and powerful in public, and then in their private lives, like weaker or more abject or somehow subjugated in various ways, that kind of paradox has been interesting to me for a long time. And it's sort of been floating in the back of my mind. And it wasn't until I started this book that a couple of years ago that I really took it on. But it's kind of been in the back of my mind for a long time.
I always remember studying the life of Mary Wollstonecraft. And here's the first woman to really sort of make it into the philosophical canon and this creator of the women's movement. And yet she was madly in love with Gilbert Imlay, this inappropriate, very handsome, but completely unreliable man who wouldn't marry her. And I think she attempted suicide when he went off and married someone else. And I always thought it was an irony. And then you found that in so many other female authors, like Simone de Beauvoir with Sartre. What went on there?
Well, she was really kind of central to my thinking about this book because her relationship with Sartre was so, she adored him. She called it at one point like one of her greatest accomplishments.
She said it was her greatest accomplishment.
Yes, and she really, but he also wanted to have this open relationship and had all these other relationships with women. Sometimes she was involved with these women, and they both partook of this open relationship, but she really loved him and was more devoted to him. I think he was for her. Right. And, she'd write in these letters like, "I'm mutilated without you." And to me, it was really sort of jarring because she's such a brilliant, accomplished person. Yeah. And, at one point her biographer said to her, what do you say to the people who, the feminists who think that your subjugation to Sartre in your personal life is at odds with your feminist theories? And she said, well, I just don't give a damn. I lived my life the way I wanted to, and it's too bad so many of them live so much in theory and not in real life. And that quote kind of intrigued me, and it's at the center of this book somehow. It's like, what is that gap?
Well, it's in many ways, I just came away from your book thinking like you are trying to tackle the central creative difference maybe between men and women. One of the first thoughts I had when finishing your book is men don't write these kinds of books. And so I was going to say like, why, well, my question for you will be, why don't men write these kinds of books? But you quoted Rebecca West, which I think may get to the heart of it, which is, you say, she said, I would waste on personal ends vitality that I should have conserved for my work. So it's this perceived struggle that women, if they get involved, squander their creativity when they're in love with or in a relationship with someone in ways men, why do we obsess over it so much?
Right. And well, and I think some of the inequity, Rebecca West also has a quote when she says, since we love men so much more than they love us, that gives them much more spare vitality to be wonderful with, or spare energy to be wonderful with. And it is kind of that idea of why do we sometimes, not everyone, and I had tried really hard not to generalize in this book because I don't think it's true of all women, and I was really trying to stay away from like all men are X, all women are X, because I don't think that's what it's about. But I do see a lot of women who do have these kinds of contradictions in their lives, and And one of the reasons why Rebecca West's essays were radical in 1916 and are radical now is that she was really talking about these really tricky, delicate contradictions that are very hard to acknowledge or admit. And I find them difficult to write about, without generalizing, but really looking closely at my own life and how they work, or at, Edith Wharton's life and how it works. So I tried to look at really specific moments to kind of just delve into that question of like, what is going on?
Yeah. And did you find an answer?
Well, even in your own life?
I feel like, okay, so I feel like I did not find an answer. And kind of for me, I mean, you guys are familiar with my writing, but I'm usually someone who like makes an argument, or I take a stand, or I kind of like come to conclusions in my work. I'm used to doing that. But in this book, I really deliberately didn't want to. Like, I wanted to not tie things up neatly, not make an argument, because I felt like I really wanted to measure how does some of these things affect us in our lives. Like, how can you measure how these forces are at work on an average Tuesday? And so while I don't feel like I came up with a solution, like the answer to your question, like why does so many women recognize themselves in these portraits? But I did find a little bit of peace with the contradictions. So I think at the beginning of the book, I was still kind of trying to say, like, kind of bewildered by these ways I've behaved or these ways other women have behaved. And by the end of the book, I think I came to a little part of just maybe accepting. And Simone De Beauvoir has a nice quote. She talks about, she says, I wrote about women as they are, as human beings divided, not as they ought to be. And I think giving up that idea of like how we ought to be, like the feminist in me really wants to be like powerful in all aspects of life, but like maybe that's not who I am all the time.
Well, I thought the ending of your book, and it's not really a spoiler alert because it's not like you're giving away a plot when you cite the end of your book, but there was that sense of peace and wisdom, and you end it with a scene where you're at a rented beach house somewhere, and you're sitting there reading Sylvia Plath's horrifying letters, and distraught, pained letters to her philandering ex-husband, I guess, at that point. And your kids are playing outside, and your husband is cooking a lovely meal. And you sort of conveyed that even while there can be this turmoil, that to just find contentment in what you have, and to sort of, I don't know, I just got this like, I'm really glad not to be Sylvia Plath right now. And I'm in a really nice moment.
Okay, so since we are like just going to the ending, I think of the ending as like peace for now, like kind of like makeshift, temporary, maybe like not forever, but like here I am in a peaceful moment. And also when I wrote that scene, because I was thinking about, I don't know if you remember the scene in The Godfather where they're like in communion in church, and then there are all these murders happening. Yeah. So it cuts from like the communion in the church to the murder. Murder. And I was kind of thinking of that because I was thinking about these violent letters and the drama and the like pain. And the pain is really about being dependent on a man. Like, can she accept that her life without this man, and she can't fundamentally. Yeah. And that like just desperation. And I just thought about cutting back and forth because the cut is so like, it just felt like kind of a portrait of my life or world in that moment. And I think coming to the end of the piece is just like, yeah, maybe I'm glad I'm not Sylvia Plath, or like, just like, by chance, I'm not so like, I just narrowly avoided like some things that here I am in this better place. But so I did feel like I ended on a note of peace, and that was kind of important for the book. Cause I think other people, somebody once said to me, somebody recently said to me about the book, they said like, it was really harrowing. Oh no, excruciating, they said. And it was kind of a compliment, but I was also like, I don't want to write a book that's just about these like painful, excruciating things that no one wants to think about.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't excruciating. I mean, there were painful things, but it was also funny. And also, in some of the descriptions, I thought, well, maybe she's not, even the initial scene or an early scene where with your first husband, you are thrown out of the car and a baby. It was just, I thought, well, maybe she's not a 100% reliable narrator. Maybe it was a more complicated situation. Because whenever there are these divorce stories, they're always harrowing. And if you hear it from one party. So I figured that, and then it did turn out that he's come through in many ways. He's maybe a better ex-husband than husband, and you show that multifaceted personality. And there's so little of that. And in feminism, there's just this stultifying oversimplification. And you cite a passage in Orwell where I don't remember the exact words, but somehow people give in to slogans and they give in to cliches, and then these cliches take the place of thought. And
it's words that do your thinking for you.
Words that do your thinking for you.
Yes.
And you don't. In your book, that does not happen, and you just resist that. And I've read a few reviews where immediately it's as if the thought police are pouncing and saying, oh, well, why didn't she go here and go there? And they don't understand what you were doing. So it's very frustrating to me to see.
I liked it because it wasn't so like a lot of these books and memoirs, especially by women, can be very, very self-absorbed. And the things, whereas you were almost clinical about yourself, which was really interesting.
And philosophical. You always go to a higher level. Right?
Exactly. But in the end, when you came away from it, and you are known as this strong, opinionated woman, and get attacked a lot, and and it's painful for you, which you talk about. But you did go hang out with a lot of abusive, I don't necessarily mean physically abusive, but emotionally abusive. Certainly that how your husband comes off. What's up with that?
You mean like why? Why?
And you sort of you do raise this in the book of what was your attraction to?
Yeah, one of my sisters said I had a calamitous taste in men. She was like, but maybe one day you'll meet someone good by accident.
Yeah.
And I do think I think you could say I have calamitous taste in men. I'm definitely attracted to very intelligent, complicated people, and maybe sort of dangerous people in various ways. And I am, so I find certain and I often wonder, as you said, why did I get in this situation? And I tried to put that in the book, that I have a line in something else I wrote where I say where a man has been monstrous, every woman has a hand in creating her own monster. And I do really believe that, these dynamics are about two people. But I think I can't really answer why I have that taste, but I guess what I wanted to do in this book is sort of look at those kinds of choices from really different angles, and not necessarily judging them. I've always been frustrated when people have been this is a healthy relationship, this is an unhealthy relationship. Sylvia Plath's relationship with Ted Hughes, unhealthy relationship. Simone De Beauvoir's relationship with Sartre, unhealthy relationship. I feel healthy, unhealthy, or judging things is less interesting than understanding them. So when you said I have a clinical view toward myself, that was kind of what I was going for, is just really analyzing what is going on in this moment. Where am I? Why am I acting in these particular ways? And I think I part of why I wanted to use my own life is because I don't think it's just me who gets into these situations, or me who romanticizes a difficult man. I mean, I think that idea of romanticizing suffering and love is kind of common, or more common than you would think.
Are there male writers? I don't know. I'm thinking of The Sorrows of Young Werther, but that's not a good example. But just men that there are men that have been destroyed by relationships and make bad choices. But I can't think right now at the top of my head.
Well, they're more like the unattainable woman. I mean, again, here we are making generalizations, but.
By the way, did you read Claire Tomalin's memoir?
Oh, I did not.
The biographer. It came out, I don't know, it's not that long ago. She's just this British
Well, yeah, I know. I've read her biographies. Yeah.
And she has this great memoir. I didn't even think I wanted to read it, but then I was listening to the New York Times. You know, they have that weekly podcast.
The daily podcast.
No, not the daily. It's the New
okay.
York. It's the book review.
Oh.
And they kept talking about it, and they didn't really want to like it, but they all liked it. And I thought, oh, I got to read this. And she's this beautiful, brilliant little girl, just bookish, and finds her way into Cambridge University, and then falls in love with Nicholas Tomlin, who's this very charismatic president of the Harvard Union, the debate group, and just handsome and irresistible. And she marries him, and she wants to be a writer and all that, but somehow she has like 5 kids. And he is a pathological philanderer and unapologetic. I mean, he just goes off with a girl to Greece for 4 months. Then he'll come back, and to apologize, he'll give her a beagle. And she takes him back. And I love her.
It sealed it for me, obviously.
The beagle, that's pretty bad. But I read it. I was just so impressed. She was sort of passive. But here she is, this woman who just went in and sort of took over a man's world. I mean, she climbed to the top of the British literary world without any problem. But in her personal life, perfect example. And I had just read it, so I recommend it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I should read that.
But you make a good point, Katie, though, about, I often think that, and I won't generalize which sex does this, but mistaking turmoil and as romance, that unless it's difficult, unless you're in pain, that somehow you're not having a romantic experience, and so sort of seeking out that type of man or a woman, if you know that.
Yeah,
it's a substitute, and in a way, I think you had a point where you were talking about like the chronic victims, the chronic weak people actually have got some of them have a pretty good game going at controlling others around them by being so helpless that, you know, they get everybody else to do things for them. But there's something about that in this idea of romance, that it's a way in some ways to be very self-absorbed. You're always thinking about your reaction and what he did to me. And I don't know. I mean, I'm just a boring, conventionally married person who I find stability in stability. I find it's way nicer.
Yeah.
To be married with.
And that's a very reasonable point of view. I mean, I feel like I went back to Wuthering Heights in the book where I talked about, you know, like Heathcliff and that kind of idea of like drama, and the lovers are like everybody's miserable and suffering, and it's so romantic. And I remember being like 12 and thinking this was so romantic. And I went back and looked at the book, and to my horror, I realized like he literally hung a little dog that belonged to the woman who ends up marrying him, and she marries him anyway. And, you know, it turns into that it's actually just like pure sadism, and he's just really cruel. And I had this romantic idea I had was just, you know, and quite commonly, I think a lot of like bookish girls like that, love that book. But I do feel like there is a way in which not having somebody and always pursuing them and always feeling like they're not actually like with you. There's something appealing about that to certain people because of the drama and because of the like just the lack of ordinariness, the lack of settledness.
A book that I loved was Christina Nearing's book.
Oh, yes.
What was it called?
Vindication of Love.
Vindication of Love. I visited her several years ago in Paris she had her little girl and she was living. Have you been in touch with her?
I actually am we've never met, but we write to each other. So she's like a pen pal of mine.
Yeah, she's my pen pal too. And I adore her, but that book, did you read it, Danielle?
No, I didn't.
Oh, you have to
tell our listeners, just give a quick thumbnail of what it is.
It's kind of a defense of dangerous love affairs, and just how it just takes you to a higher level of being, and the passion and the drama, and you come away from that
I don't know. It's like cutting yourself or something, though. And I think
who was it that said like falling in love is like giving someone a loaded gun, and they're
but I think that's I mean, obviously people feel that way and they do it, but it also, I do find it a sort of immature, self-absorbent.
You were just lucky. You were lucky. You met the love of your life when you were young, and you married, and now she has a perfect marriage. And but that's only about 20% of marriages.
No, okay, but the point is, how do you get to a happy marriage? And if you're always seeking that kind of drama, it kind of absolves you of responsibility too. That you never have to go through the day-to-day, ordinariness of learning to live with someone who is not you, and appreciate them if it works, I think deeper and deeper and deeper levels, that I think all the tumult is like a storm passing, but the storm ends and you've got to live with it. And that's why, I mean, sure, if you want your life to be in turmoil all the time, maybe that's a way to live and it seems romantic, but I don't know, it's my own prejudice. I would just find it exhausting and actually unproductive. I mean, one of the themes of your book, Katie, is about, I think we were talking earlier about women fearing that should they fall in love and they're creative, the man will just unfailingly dominate them and they will give up they'll sort of
ambition,
submit to domesticity. And I don't know, I found in my case, it was actually finding someone and having the storm calm that enabled me to actually write much more than I think I would, or certainly when I was single, struggling along. There's something also in favor of a settled life too, that you can sort of put that sort of big decision to the side and now focus on, I don't know, who knows? It's...
And that's true. I'm curious about some themes in the book, like this bully who was in your department. So you're
female bully.
A female bully.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder if, I'm not sure of this, but I'll try it out. If we made a mistake, so we have all these laws and all raised consciousness about sexual harassment, which we should. However, maybe the real problem is bullies in the workplace, or not. And so sexual harassment is one category. But you had a colleague in your department, you were coming up for tenure, and she was a sadist. I've never heard of anything. She would tell you, like, go and photocopy these papers for me, just treating you like a servant. You were a colleague, you were an assistant professor, a junior professor. She was ordering you around. Then at your tenure review, she brought in every bad review. As I heard that part, I wasn't sure if you'd gotten tenure or not. As I heard her this reading off all these reviews, I thought, I bet she got tenure, because these were so vituperative and just gossip. It was a gossip about, and I thought, she's got to have some sane colleagues. And I know you're a very fine scholar and teacher, so it just didn't make any sense. But my God. And I don't think we're doing enough about bullies in the workplace. I mean, we're doing a lot about harassers, which is good, but there are also bullies, and they can be women.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I wanted to bring up, this is sort of, in this book, I kind of stayed away from politics overtly, as you can tell, but like that point of like, the person who made my life most difficult in the workplace was a woman. And I do write about, one of the things I talk about in the book is like, we like the idea of powerful women, but we don't like powerful women themselves. And the idea of women competing with other women, which I think is very hard to talk about and think about, but the idea of feeling like you have to pretend to be less powerful than you are, that there are women who are, and I hear from other people too, that one kind of bullying that exists is women who are behaving competitively to other women. And I feel like that, again, does not negate men sexually harassing women or male bullying and all kinds of things, but it coexists with it. And and I think you're right. Like how people abuse power it's not just that men abuse power and women are powerless. It's that lots of people in power abuse power. And I feel like that kind of like sort of genderizing it and looking at it more as what you're saying is like, here's the way bullying works. But I also think the idea of having to express your power in a way that humiliates somebody else, that just, it was interesting in this instance because it was a woman doing it, and there was like really only what was in it for her was really just like expressing her power.
Yeah, I could admit to all sorts of sins and foibles, but I never wanted to express my power by humiliating someone.
You're a nice person, Christina.
You're a normal person. I think.
No, I think as Katie points out, it gets complicated. But tell us about, speaking of power, you got really Twitter mobbed when you were writing this essay for Harper's about. I think it was the shitty media men's list that came out. We've talked about this on that program, but
and it was a piece that said she was supporting the Me Too movement, but worried about due process and some excesses, and it's just a completely reasonable piece. News got out, and it's one of the few articles that I've seen that was viciously attacked before it was.
It wasn't even published. So tell us about that, and
so it was quite a strange episode. People thought I was writing kind of against this form of Twitter feminism and this like mob thinking. And then in a way, what happened with the piece before it even came out and like advertisers were pulling their ads from Harper's and this big hysteria about the piece, it kind of illustrated exactly the phenomenon I was talking about. And I called the piece The Other Whisper Network, and it was just about how women didn't feel comfortable expressing these reservations that you just enumerated. They didn't feel comfortable saying, well, maybe we should have thought more about Al Franken, or maybe this has gone a little too far. Or should we have investigate something more fully? Or, they were just people kind of, who are skeptical about certain aspects of this movement, and they just didn't feel like they could say that out loud. And so I collected, everyone spoke to me anonymously, and I finally made that into the point of the piece. It's like, why do we have to be so anonymous? Mm-hmm. In expressing these pretty innocuous common sense things. And in the moment, people got very angry. And so there was really a very insane, huge Twitter response, which was exactly what I was writing about, and the kind of viciousness and kind of mindlessness of this way of thinking.
Oh, and, I'm just going to give an example. There was this writer, Nicole Cliff. She tweeted, if you have a piece about to come out in Harper's, ask your editor if the Roiphe piece is happening. If it is, I will pay you cash for what you lose by yanking it. Yeah. Here's a female writer, a woman writer, offering money to people to protest you. I've never seen anything like this.
Right, and I mean, the piece also hadn't appeared, and they didn't know what was in it, and they thought that I was naming someone. And
you know what? Even if you had named her, why does was Maura Donegan? Why does she deserve anonymity when she created a McCarthyist list on Twitter that named men? Some of them were probably guilty, but many of them were not.
Yeah.
And it was an anonymous informant. She puts this on, and then she.
And then I don't think that she was very private about this list, to be honest. But in an event, the whole episode was kind of a false drama. It was like a false.
Exactly.
Things that they were upset about, and people were upset that it was really just a moment where criticizing or in any way expressing some sort of concern about this political moment was just really, taboo. And I honestly felt it was kind of disturbing because it was so intense. But it also
your editor stood up for you, right? I mean, even under threats.
Harper stood up for me. They really defended the piece. They definitely stood behind the piece. And in the end, they obviously sold a lot of copies of that magazine because more people read that
I subscribed
5,000 word Harper piece.
Everybody should subscribe to Harper's because they've been brave throughout this period of where there's
and so it was fine. But it was an example of sort of the the dangerousness of this kind of media bubble and the way people are, it wasn't just some of the people doing really disturbing things on Twitter were like, there was an editor at Esquire who made a Halloween mask out of my face, cutting out the eyes. That was like really disturbing to look at, but that was like an editor at Esquire, wasn't like a random person. It was
Russia.
Somebody with a respectable media job who thought it was really a good expression of his feminism to like mutilate a picture of a woman.
Yeah.
So some of that stuff, or people were tweeting like, suck my dick, Katie Roiphe. Like there was a lot of like violence to it.
Yeah.
In the name of protecting women. And the whole thing was so hypocritical. They also, like, those kind of people don't understand irony. So like they didn't understand the irony of like attacking a woman and what that means. But it altogether, like it kind of proves the point I was making in the piece. And it was, I got to put it into the piece because I had a little extra time. So anyway, that was a not fun episode.
Well, it was so not fun that what they really want to do is to discourage you and other women from writing and expressing some, just questioning and having a dissident opinion. See, they want to shut it down. And that is so unhealthy for feminism. It's so unhealthy for men and women. Just to have all these forbidden topics and then this punishing little mob that comes after you. And they really hate you so much because the people they hate most are those that are sort of should be on their side. So they sort of see you're on the left and you can't dismiss you, just ignore you as some crazy right winger. So they hate you even more. And I've seen them do this to Caitlin Flanagan, Laura Kipnis. And do you have something I've always wondered is why aren't there more women like you, like me, like Camille Paglia, Kipnis, etc.? I thought early on when I saw some of the excesses of a sort of strident, sex-phobic, male demonizing feminism, I thought there'll be a lot of academics, women writers, women scholars that'll protest because this is just too ridiculous. And, there haven't been that many. If you think about it, there are far more who have joined who are part of the majority.
I mean, I think one of my things is just that if everybody says exactly the same thing, it's just also, aside from being unhealthy for our political discourse, it's also just boring. Like in Twitter, you just repeat endlessly the thing that everybody is supposed to say. And I think that one of the problems is fear, as you said, which is I'm lucky that I have a tenured position. So I felt like I could write that piece. I think if I was a freelance writer, and I know lots of freelance writers who do not feel like they could have written a piece like that because who's ever going to publish them again? And I really did have some dark moments in there where I was like, am I ever going to publish another word again? And I sort of thought to myself, well, I have my teaching, which I love, so I'm okay. Like I had the luxury of a position that I can feel like I can sometimes, sit in. I mean, obviously I haven't always had this position. I only just got tenure, but I do feel like I do have that luxury. And I think for a lot of people, and I know a lot of people who wanted to write things and just didn't feel like it would ultimately be worth it for them. And obviously there are people who do. You see like Barry Weiss or, you see all kinds of people, but usually they have an institution.
Right.
Because otherwise it's a little like, this force of conformity is very powerful. So, I can understand a young writer or, somebody like some novelist, like just being a little careful. And that's the scary thing about it. That's what I find very ominous.
I was going to ask you, because this goes back to your first book too, is why do people have such a visceral reaction to you, Katie?
I do not know. I don't know. It's true that I think they do. Like I tried to write about it in this book, like why I'm unlikable or different.
Totally likable, charming, and an original. I mean, just a beautiful writer. It's just so sinister that someone like you would be a target of the program from the junior, what is it? Orwell's Junior Sex League, Junior Anti-Sex League.
But I do, I think about, one of the things I try to write about in this book is what is it, what am I doing that like arouses this hostility? And I do think some of it does. I did try to kind of examine that question. I have a section where I talk about being relatable and women writers being relatable.
Yes. And your smile, like, why can't you smile?
Why can't you smile? And also the idea of like, I think showing weakness, like I don't generally, in this book is different, but like in most of my writing, I come across as kind of like tough or fierce, or people are always saying to me, like, you're not like as scary as I thought you would be. And I think there's something in my writing where I put forward a self who's like a little more tough than I am, or sort of fierce. And so I think that idea that, and I think women do it all the time. Like if somebody says to you, you look great, you say, oh no, I have circles under my eyes. Like you always have to say like, I'm not intimidating. No, I'm not, I'm like not that great. I'm falling apart. I barely feeding my kid breakfast today. So that idea of like saying, I call them I'm a mess moments. I think I haven't done that much in my life because it's just not the kind of writing that I do, where I talk about my vulnerabilities, kind of what you were saying. Like, I just don't find like my vulnerabilities that interesting. I can think of other writers who find their like sadnesses more interesting.
Or their rage. A lot of them like to write about their rage.
Yeah. No, I think, and I wonder sometimes, and you touch on this too in your book, about it being different as a woman opinion writer, or when you, because a lot of your writing has been on these sort of more political aspects of the sexes, and then just taking a stand, not backing down, not using yourself as an example. I mean, there is this female impulse to always say, as you say, oh no, but I just, like, we all have to, there's something that we're always having to bring ourselves down, and with other women. So it's a deeply female impulse for whatever reason. And then when you don't do that, maybe it just disturbs people that you're not, as a woman, willing to do that, or.
I think it's like, I feel that, it's annoying or like grating, or makes it just somehow like gets people angry when you don't do that, when you don't offer up some sort of vulnerability or weakness, or like something, a way to sort of mitigate the kind of pushiness of your taking this opinion. And I try to talk about that in the book, because I do, it's not that I don't want my readers to like me, or I don't want to be a relatable writer. I just like, I'm only relatable to like a really small subset of people who I guess are kind of like me, who might relate to this. But I feel like in general, I am not performing in the way that women writers usually perform to be relatable. And I kind of go through, even somebody like Joan Didion, who's like tough as nails, will write about like, but then I was like crying in the Chinese laundry and crying when I walked down the street because I was so sad. And those kinds of moments where she writes in like, oh, I'm so neurotic. Oh, I'm so, whatever. She tries to kind of say, I'm not this like threatening, brilliant person. I'm just like you. And I think that performance is something that our culture is really expecting of women writers. And we sort of put it on women writers. We want them to say something that like, diffuses the kind of like audacity of taking authority.
Right. It's more therapeutic.
Camille Paglia once pointed out that now we have a couple of generations of young women among the best educated in human history, the most, opportunity rich young women. And yet we haven't really produced the we had these women writers that, you look back in the 40s and 50s, and there were these towering female intellectuals, and Susan Sontag and into the 80s and 90s, but not just her, but, Iris Murdoch and Mary McCarthy. And maybe it's true of men too, where maybe we're not producing these towering male intellectuals either, but where are they? Why haven't, with all of this education and empowerment, doesn't it seem like there's a dearth of female public intellectuals?
I feel like there are some pretty impressive ones. I feel like somebody like Maggie Nelson.
Yeah.
I feel like there's some pretty impressive ones, but I guess I think our culture doesn't kind of glamorize or celebrate a public intellectual anymore.
Yeah, just as I said that, I thought
intellectual now is like living in Bushwick with 4 roommates, like publishing in a small periodical you haven't read.
Yeah,
because it's a lot harder.
Or it's Oprah.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to like make, when Mary McCarthy was writing, you could write book reviews for the New Republic and like support yourself. It just isn't like the same world, I don't think.
Right.
So I feel like that's the economics and that's the economics values of our culture.
I recently read this wonderful, it was sort of a biography of the 18th century, but particularly Samuel Johnson. And here he was, one of the most brilliant creatures ever to live, but it was always about money. He was desperate for money, and it was true of Balzac. I mean, there are many, many writers, and I think a lot of women writers, it's impossible. And then with the complications of children and difficult marriages, and just having the money to survive. Anyway, I wished that you deserve to have won a MacArthur Fellowship.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping now with the tenure, you'll have the peace and the time and the ability, because you're such a gifted writer and we need to hear more. I mean,
thank you.
Really. But I know you had to struggle. And then to not only that, and then to have to struggle with this opprobrium because of your originality. That irritates me. It really does. It makes me mad. And I'm not given to rage. I'm not raging against you.
You kind of are. We had to create a special feature called the rant, so you could get
a rant
out of your system.
I don't care anymore. I'm just going to drink and say what I think. But I think it's that people have gone mad and how they couldn't appreciate, Katie, you could be one of these public intellectuals, but you're pushed and you're battered and they threaten and frighten you. But now, just wait, you'll come out.
Well, thank you.
Well, Katie, it's been so wonderful to meet you, even at least virtually. Followed you for a long time, and your book is The Power Notebooks. I can hold it up on video, which I can't normally do on our podcast. And thank you
guys so much.
And good luck through
come to Washington
the whole pandemic. Well, one day we'll meet.
One day we'll meet in person. One day we'll stop doing the Zoom meetings.
If that happens again.
God, it seems indefinite.
It'll go on for longer than we think.
I know.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Okay.
Great
Bye. Thank you.
Well, everybody now seems to be running their business from home. And if you're trying to deal with HR issues, that can be a nightmare. But Bambee, that's Bambee, is here to help you.
And when running a business, you know that your HR situation can kill you.
And wrongful termination suits, minimum wage requirements, labor regulations.
And HR manager salaries, they aren't cheap. An average of, $70,000 a year.
Bambee was created specifically for small business.
You can get a dedicated HR manager, craft an HR policy, and maintain your compliance, all for just $99 a month.
With Bambee, you can change HR from your biggest liability to your biggest strength.
Your dedicated HR manager is available by phone, email, and real chat.
From onboarding to terminations, they customize your policies to fit your business and help you manage your employees day to day, all for just $99 a month.
Month to month, no hidden fees, cancel anytime.
You didn't start your business because you wanted to spend time on HR compliance.
So let Bambee help. Get your free HR audit today.
Go to Bambee.com/FEM, F-E-M, right now to schedule your free HR audit.
That's Bambee.com/FEM.
Spelled B-A-M to the BEE.com/FEM. Well, that was fun.
I love her. Years ago, I was on some program with Katha Pollitt, who is this doctrinaire, Stalinist,
a lot of fun.
to be honest, not a lot of fun. And when Katie Roiphe was very young, as I said, 23, 24, she comes out with her book, just sort of questioning this hyper puritanical male hating feminist movement that had developed on campus. And Katha Pollitt wrote this vicious attack on her in The Nation. And I was on this program with Katha. And I said, and she was much older. I mean, I'm old enough to be almost. I mean, yeah, I could be Katie's mother. So could Katha. And I said to her, you're a middle-aged woman and you attack this young girl. And she's just trying her best and beautifully sort of. And I just went after her. And then that was right before the program. And then we went on the air. And we were supposed to have a debate. And she just collapsed. She didn't say a word.
Oh, that's funny.
And I felt like,
I remember being paired with Katha Pollitt. Yeah, she was at The Nation at that time. But also, Katie was saying is when I asked her about why is she so visceral to people, that I think, yes, it's true. We don't really have a culture of public intellectuals anymore in the way that we did with Mary McCarthy and people. But I just think the dialogue seems conversation has been 30 years ago, as we discovered, just more doctrinaire, that you're just not allowed to voice dissent from a certain quarter.
But as he said, it's just human to voice dissent. We can't all be marching in lockstep and around a variety of issues for which, reasonable people disagree. But what the other side wants to do, in this case, the Twitter feminists, is not make progress through intellectual exchange and winning the argument. That's how a lot of progress is made. In this case, they just want to shut down the other side. And I really feel that her career was cut off. Not anymore. I mean, I think when she's young,
we mentioned she had tenure, but I don't think we mentioned that she's like the director of cultural reporting and criticism at the NYU Carter Journalism School, which is impressive. So she's
very impressive.
Yeah. So she's teaching but yeah, I mean, it's hard to know because her career was also made by her dissent. I mean, it did get a lot of attention and
no.
She had to reckon with her, the Katha Pollitt.
She was a brilliant PhD student at Princeton. In a normal world, she would have moved into an English department at a good school. That didn't happen. And I think it was because of her book that she wrote when she was 20. I think that.
But at least it had a good effect. I mean, it was an important book.
But I think she paid a price.
All right, let's go to some of our listener feedback. We don't have Ella here to read it because Ella's in a bunker somewhere too.
Well, she's been quarantined longer than anyone. Goes back to that original synagogue in New Rochelle.
She went to the synagogue in New Rochelle. Oh,
Ella,
but she's been fine. She didn't get it. But, okay, but so we mentioned at the top that we had a lot of reaction to the dinner. So we have from our Lana, Lana, we hear from you almost every episode. It's great. And by the way, if you want to reach out to us, just email us at contact@femsplainers.com. And I'll say that to our listeners at Glow and ThinkSpot. I don't have a good way of communicating with you. So if you do want to ask us questions for our special episode that we do for our subscribers, Patreon, Glow, ThinkSpot, just reach out to us at contact@femsplainers, identify yourself as a supporter, and we'll include it in the special episode. But anyway.
Can I ask our supporters and others one question?
Sure.
Okay. So if you're like a Twitter obsessive, which unfortunately I kind of am, and this isn't just Twitter, it's all over social media. So there's this word for like liberal women who benefit from white supremacy. They're called Karens. Have you heard about that?
The Karen is basic, right? It's that term basic.
I don't know.
Isn't Karen a white, she's kind of us, white middle-aged mother with yoga pants? Isn't that Karen?
Yeah.
That's
So
basic.
there are Karens, and then there's Chads. That's some, I don't know. But I think, I'm asking our listeners, I think we need to use the word like Cyrus. And that would refer to, Alcira is upper middle class, in every way privileged, but she's taken on the mantle of the oppressed. There needs to be a definition of it. Just, so if we're going to have Karens and Chads, we need Cyrus.
Right. Okay, fair. Why don't we just adopt that? We'll just.
But people can
not just Cyrus.
We need a good definition.
Right.
Next time we'll come forth with definition of the Karens, the Chads, the Cyrus. And
Syra is a privileged person pretending or
a
feigning
privileged
oppression.
person of color.
Feigning oppression.
Feigning oppression. And I don't know, is she really, what are her credentials for this oppression?
Okay, well, let's go to our listeners, because you're talking about the Cyras and the Reginas. So Lana said,
and the Reginas, it should be a Regina too, because that's another category of bully.
Okay, Christina, let our listeners speak.
Okay.
Okay, Lana, thank you. She said, this was referring to the episode we just mentioned, was this episode a rerun? It sounded so familiar. Maybe I heard the call they did with the Nazi podcaster, which is odd. Yeah, that's right. She called us, they had haplessly gotten onto a Nazi podcast, and then they compared us to that. Basically, says Lana, they want people to show up prepared to be flagellated. It's some kind of religious self-abnegation ritual. They literally want to preach to the choir. People are only allowed in if they've already been softened up and are prepared for self-mortification and penance.
Do you think it's like a sexual
we actually
perversion?
No, I think the religious and we remember we talked about its parallels with early forms of Christianity. But Lana goes on to say, with the paucity of religion and excess of worldly riches in our lives these days, people have turned to other means of getting their religious sacrificial highs. One, for example, is the ever self-immolating mother who sacrifices her entire being to her kids. I think the quote-unquote original sin of being white is another form of religious mortification. Politics can also sit in for religion for some people. And she said, I'm glad you didn't waste any good alcohol on that bunch. Well, that's true. It was a virtual cocktail. So thank you.
They would be, in a better world, we could just meet them in person and have some drinks and just talk it out.
That was clearly, as Lana points out, not what they do. And certainly not for $2,500. Okay, So now we have one from Carolyn, also about that episode. It says, hi, Femsplainers, longtime listener and a fellow femme philosopher. I must admit I didn't make it all the way through the last podcast, as your dinner guest left me with quite the headache. But I did have some large qualms with what your guest had to say that I thought would be worth addressing. These ladies stated up front that they only engage in a dialogue with people who A, must be women, and B, must agree with their worldview in entirety. If that's the case, why bother? What change can they hope to accomplish in such a small echo chamber? What is the call to action besides accepting the label racist? And two, further, I think they could get further if they simply change the label racist to inherently biased. What they fail to recognize is that accepting the label of racist is, in our society, existentially damning, both economically and socially. To accept or acknowledge a label of racist is to invite back, not dialogue. And then she goes on to say, their emotionally charged refusal to dialogue or debate is quite familiar to me. People have lost the ability to dialogue with anyone who does not share their presuppositions and refuse to even recognize their presuppositions as such. And then she says, returning now to reading my Kierkegaard in quarantine.
I'm so glad.
As long as she's not reading Kafka.
I'm glad she's reading Kierkegaard. I love Kierkegaard. And it's nice to find a sister philosopher. Because I asked this of Katie, like, why aren't there more women philosophers speaking out against this groupthink?
Mm-hmm.
Mindless, like stultifying conformity that we find. And instead, I can't even tell you about the feminist philosophers. They're still there and thinking it's a cult with dogmas rather than thoughts. But never mind.
Speaking of documents, we haven't heard from Izzy on this podcast. This is a miracle. Must be asleep.
I'm worried about her.
Okay.
She's unusual. Should I go get her?
No, don't.
Let sleeping dogs lie.
Let sleeping Izzy's lie. Okay, this is.
By the way, I have to bathe her and comb her, and it's a desperate situation. She almost can't see. It's going to compromise her health. So I was going to write to the governor and tell him that for multi-poos, it's a state emergency. Those businesses should be open. But I thought that might seem.
Yeah, I don't think at this moment that's going to get a lot of sympathy. I think he's worried more about frontline healthcare workers.
Saving human lives. Well, but
members need to be saved. I mean, they're going to be one of the businesses, like restaurants, very, very hard hit by this. Let alone, I would like a hair salon to open because we're also all going to look like hippies when this is through.
Which isn't altogether bad. Finally, my look comes in style.
My gray roots come in real nice. We'll have those hippie middle-aged gray hair, and sort of we'll have to own it.
I have to say, I'm a woman of a certain age, but if you look at my roots, they're not gray, are they?
Christina, just so our listeners who are not watching this know, she just leaned forward and showed me her dark.
Mousy brown, but not gray. I don't care.
Okay. From Ken. Also on the race episode, he said Ken is offering us very helpful advice. He said, "You viewed these guests as you view all your guests, and that they would come on and tell you their ideas, and you would freely discuss them and question them. Regina and crew seem to be under the impression to come on that they were just going to do a version of their dinners where it has already been accepted that the hosts are racist and these women will explain them to them. This is why conflict arose. On a smaller point, you noted that they hung up after you started talking about Daryl Davis. He's the jazz musician who would go one by one befriend Klan members, black jazz musician, and get them to give up their white supremacy just through friendship, because his feeling was once they knew a black man, that it was hard to sustain blind prejudice. And he was very successful, and there was a documentary about him, which was great. Anyway, so once I started talking about Daryl Davis, Ken goes on to say, as if that was the issue they couldn't deal with. However, if you listen closely, they were already talking about leaving the call before that subject was introduced. Yeah, I mean, we had hoped they would do their dinner thing, but then they just kept making all these racist statements. Like all Asians are racist, and
it's so reactionary. And I don't know about your family, but my extended family is multi-ethnic, multiracial, and I think that a lot of divisions among people are being defeated by marriage and by friendship. And American society and Canada, if you look at the data, we are among the least racist in the world, countries in the world. And people have more objections, and that would be true of my parents. My parents would have been more mortified for me marrying a Republican than someone of a different race. I think they would have been fine if I came out as a lesbian.
I think,
but if I brought home a Richard Nixon supporting Republican, they would have been triggered.
Don't you also think this is one of the things that the pandemic is changing? We talked, I guess, a little bit about it with John Tierney, but these kinds of concerns, like right now, more blacks are dying. Like the percentage of blacks getting COVID versus whites is huge, and for various reasons.
It's probably and also it's probably disproportionately poor, elderly black men. That is the demographic that is being devastated. And
so you're now seeing this kind of racial tragedy. We're coming out of this with these frontline healthcare workers, delivery people. I mean, we're sort of having a class war too is going to come out of this. So suddenly, these are the issues that are rightfully going to come to the fore, and suddenly the Reginas and the Syras, we can call them that. It's just the way it's going to look absurd. this way of approaching the problem. Okay, last listener reaction. This is from Taylor. Taylor is a woman, I believe. This one, she tells a story. It's so chilling. I'm going to read it, and I'm not going to edit it back because it's so interesting. And what she's going through, she's at a well-known, prestigious college, which we won't name. She says, "Dear Christina and Danielle, I will try to be short in explaining how much this podcast means to me, but I won't make any promises. From an early age, I've always had a sense of justice. Maybe when I was 5, I remember learning that tigers were going extinct and that there were more in captivity in the wild. And she began, advocating for tigers. And she goes on about how her whole becoming a student, going to college, she joined the Peace Corps. She worked for Amnesty International. So her whole life has been about rectifying injustice.
Yeah.
And then, so this is the story that is sort of shocking. She said, "When I was in Zambia, Trump was elected president and the Me Too movement blew up. Trump was irrelevant to most Zambians, and many truck drivers actually thought he would do great. Living in a village with no electricity or internet connection, I couldn't and did not keep up with the Me Too explosion of accusations. 2 exceptional events did happen that not until now have I realized how epochal they were to my understanding of the post-truth anti-intellectual phenomenon going on the left. The first is that a close friend of mine, a sweet man on the Asperger's line, was falsely accused of rape by a very mentally unstable female. I've tried to tell my friends this horrific story and have been swiftly shut down. The second significant event was the witch trial of my host grandfather in my rural village. I think this is literally a witch trial. He was accused of murdering over 90 people without even leaving his home. I watched my otherwise smart and logical Zambian host family members believe that their own grandfather was a murderer and had cursed them. The shaming and shunning done to these 2 individuals and other victims of false accusations is explained accurately and brilliantly in a number of your episodes." Oh, thanks, Taylor. "Since being back, I've struggled to tell story and share opinions for fear of being misunderstood. I now believe this is because I follow no specific ideology. I go to a school at a liberal, well-intentioned institution, but I can't help but to feel we are walking on eggshells regarding our speech." Anyway, that witch trial of the Zambian grandfather is terrifying, but it's this is why
it's in our nature. I mean, people can be
right
so maniacal and intolerant, and then it boils over into violence so easily. We have to control that in ourselves. And how so many people on the left and the right, because it's at both on the left and right, how they can't see that.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that's what was so, again, great about Katie's book is it refreshingly talking about ultimately these sexual differences, and you could call it imbalances of power, but in a non-ideological way was so interesting in getting into the lives.
And acknowledging that women have power and men have power, and that it's always a complex, murky story, what goes on between 2 people. There are occasions where you just have a brutal criminal, but most human interactions are not like that. There are 2 sides. What I love about her book is she kind of gives voice to the human perspective, which is
complicated perspective.
Complicated human perspective.
Right.
And isn't tempted to take her fate or some misfortune that befalls her and just succumb to convenient cliches. She resists that, and I love her for that.
Yeah. And I think we had talked about the last scene in her book about, I think, just appreciating the moment and not projecting, she said, what ought to be, and embracing what is. And I think that's a very good attitude to have right now as we get through this pandemic. This crisis is just trying. I mean, I think we were out walking at a correct distance with our dog, with our friend Megan, and she was just talking about how she was seeing like the leaves and the blossoms more clearly, like in sharp relief, like suddenly appreciating.
I have never experienced spring like this because I can't go anywhere except my backyard. I have watched every day, every moment as spring emerges. And at first I thought like diabolical things were happening to my garden. There were these little weird growths. They were, what are they called? Fiddlesticks?
Oh, fiddleheads. Canadians eat those. They're very considered a delicacy.
Well, it's the beginning of a fern.
Right. They're like embryonic ferns.
Embryonic ferns. And they're little freaky. But now they just burst forth in one night.
Yeah.
They have ferns everywhere in my shade garden in the back.
Yeah. Well, okay.
And you have tulips everywhere.
I know. I have a crazy amount of tulips that I'm now.
I want to come to your house in my car. I'm going to have gloves, a mask, a hazmat suit for Izzy. And then
dog.
You put on gloves, cut some of your tulips, put them in my trunk.
Yeah.
Open with the key. We'll have no interaction.
Right.
I want your tulips.
I've been doing that for my friends. I've been doing that. I've been taking them actually over Easter to the hospital. I just cut a bunch of things and I leave it with the security guard, and I've taken some to some elderly shut-ins just so people have
like me.
You can't. Yeah, you're an elderly shut-in. Oh, just some piece of beauty, because you can't even all the I think florists, like you were talking about dog groomers, I think florists are essential business.
They're essential. You can't send flowers to people.
I know. So it's yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, we'll be back next week. We hope we're not struck down.
Yeah, if they don't like ban us from the internet for something.
No, I just don't want you or I to get sick. But anyway, all right. Well, thank you, and thanks for reaching out. And remember to please support us if you enjoyed this podcast. More important than ever, at Patreon.
Review us on iTunes and the other. We need those reviews.
Yeah, but more
ones. If you don't like us, forget it. I said anything.
But yes, please consider supporting us. Just like if all of you just gave $1 a month, would be so able to keep this going, especially.
And we can get, once we get out of this, we can get a tech advisor.
I know, I'm watching all these error messages coming across on the microphone. I'm just going, oh no, we're gonna have another problem. But we'll
have a problem.
We'll have it by the end of this pandemic. We'll be so pro.
We're gonna be so good. But with your support, we're gonna be even better.
That's right. So thank you. So it's Patreon, Glow, ThinkSpot, but you can also just go to femsplainers.com, and we have everything linked and set up there, including our podcast. So cheers, dear.
L'chaim.
Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Keep up with us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers, and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. Send questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com.
A big thanks to Ella Ryder, our research and in-studio production assistant, and to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor. And we're proud to be part of the Ricochet Network, and grateful to the American Enterprise Institute for allowing us to record in its studio every week in downtown Washington, D.C.
And miss something? You'll find everything you need at our homepage, femsplainers.com, including links to past episodes, our sponsors, where you can sign up to support us, and even to merch. And please don't forget to like us or give us 5 stars on iTunes.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.